Pick up an apple. Any apple. The one sitting in your kitchen right now or on the shelf of the nearest supermarket. It is almost certainly one of a handful of varieties: Red Delicious, Gala, Fuji, Granny Smith. It was grown in one of several industrial regions optimized for yield and transport. It was harvested before it was ripe, stored in a controlled atmosphere for weeks or months, and shipped thousands of miles to reach you. It looks perfect. It tastes like almost nothing. 200 years ago, there were more than 16,000 named apple varieties growing in North America alone. Each one was the result of decades, sometimes centuries, of selective cultivation, farmers saving seeds from the trees that did best in their specific soil, their specific microclimate, their specific valley. An apple grown in the limestone hills of Vermont was not the same fruit as an apple grown in the river delta of Virginia. The trees were different. The flavor was different. The texture was different. The relationship between the apple and the land that produced it was, in the most literal sense, unique. Today, fewer than 100 apple varieties are grown commercially in the United States. Most supermarkets stock 6. This is not a story about apples. This is a story about what happens when you flatten a living system into a number. To understand what agricultural standardization actually destroyed, you have to understand what it replaced. For 10,000 years, farming was a conversation. A farmer planted a seed, observed what grew, saved the best specimens, replanted, observed again. Over generations, this process, entirely local, entirely empirical, requiring no laboratory and no theory, produced an extraordinary diversity of cultivated life. The farmers of ancient Mesoamerica developed hundreds of distinct varieties of maize, each adapted to the precise altitude, rainfall pattern, and soil chemistry of its home valley. The rice farmers of South and Southeast Asia cultivated more than 140,000 distinct varieties of Oryza sativa, the common rice plant, each one a fine-grained response to a specific ecological niche. The wheat fields of the Fertile Crescent, of the Anatolian Plateau, of medieval Europe contained not one kind of wheat, but hundreds: emmer, einkorn, spelt, red fife, rouge de Bordeaux, turkey red, each one carrying in its genetics a record of its place. This was not inefficiency. This was precision of a different kind. Not the precision of standardization, but the precision of fit. A landrace wheat variety, as these locally adapted strains are called, did not merely grow in its home territory. It belonged there. Its root system had co-evolved with the microorganisms in that specific soil. Its flowering time was synchronized with the typical onset of rains in that specific season. Its disease resistance was calibrated to the specific pathogens present in that specific landscape. It was, in the most exact sense, tuned to its place, as precisely as the organ builders of the great cathedrals tuned their instruments to the specific resonance of the stone rooms that would contain them. And like those organs, like those bells, it could not be moved without losing something essential. The disruption, when it came, was swift and absolute. In the second half of the 19th century, industrial milling technology arrived. The new steel roller mills were more efficient than traditional stone grinding, but they had a requirement: consistent input. A mill optimized for one type of wheat could not easily adapt to another. The industrial bakers who used its output demanded uniformity of texture, rise, and shelf life. The railroads that distributed the flour across continents required that it be produced in quantities no local variety could match. And so, gradually, then rapidly, the great diversity of agricultural life was reduced to a set of optimized standards. The process accelerated catastrophically in the 20th century. The Green Revolution of the 1950s and 1960s, genuinely well-intentioned, genuinely effective at preventing famine in the short term, introduced a small number of high-yield dwarf wheat and rice varieties across the entire developing world. Norman Borlaug's IR8 rice variety, released in 1966, produced yields so superior to traditional varieties that farmers abandoned their local strains within a single generation. In India alone, hundreds of thousands of rice varieties that had been cultivated for millennia were replaced within a few decades by a handful of modern hybrids. The knowledge of how to grow them, held not in books but in the hands and memories of farming families, disappeared with the people who had carried it. The numbers are staggering. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations estimates that since the beginning of the 20th century, approximately 75% of the world's crop diversity has been lost. Not stored in a seed bank, not retired, lost, permanently, irreversibly, gone from the living world. In the United States, roughly 93% of the vegetable varieties available in 1903 are now extinct. In Europe, it is estimated that 80 to 90% of traditional fruit tree varieties have disappeared since 1900. In China, where farmers once cultivated 10,000 distinct wheat varieties, today 4 predominate. Somewhere between 10 and 14,000 apple varieties once existed in Europe. Fewer than 2,000 can still be found today. The rest are names in old botanical registers, watercolor illustrations in agricultural society archives, and nothing else. The trees are gone, the seeds are gone, the taste is gone. The knowledge of what made them different and why they mattered is gone. But what exactly did we lose beyond the flavor? This is where the science becomes both recent and disturbing. The emerging field of the gut microbiome has revealed something that traditional agricultural societies understood intuitively without being able to articulate. The relationship between a person and the food grown in their local soil is not merely nutritional. It is ecological. It is microbial. It is, in a word that sounds imprecise but is technically accurate, resonant. The soil of a particular place contains a unique community of bacteria, fungi, archaea, and protozoa, billions of organisms per gram assembled by the specific mineral content, moisture regime, temperature cycle, and history of that soil. These organisms interact with the roots of plants grown in that soil. They influence which nutrients the plant absorbs, which secondary metabolites it produces, which flavor compounds develop in its flesh, and which microbial communities it carries into the food chain. When a person eats food grown in the soil of the place where they live, they are ingesting not just calories and vitamins, but a community of microorganisms that is co-evolved with the local environment, and, over generations, with the human communities that consumed it. Traditional fermented foods made this connection explicit. The sourdough bread of a particular village was leavened with wild yeasts captured from the air of that village. The cheese of a particular valley carried the specific lactic acid bacteria of that valley's milk and stone cellars. The wine of a particular hillside contained microbial fingerprints of that hillside's soil, what the French call terroir, a word for which no fully satisfying translation exists in English because the concept itself is foreign to industrial food culture. These fermented foods were not merely processed calories. They were, in the most literal sense, concentrated expressions of place. Modern food science is only beginning to understand what the loss of this diversity means for human health. We know that the diversity of the gut microbiome, the community of microorganisms living in the human digestive system, is strongly correlated with immune function, mental health, metabolic health, and resistance to chronic disease. We know that this diversity is built, in significant part, by exposure to diverse food microbiomes. We know that the standardized, processed, globally sourced diet of the modern world is associated with a dramatic reduction in gut microbiome diversity compared to populations eating traditional, local diets. A 2018 study comparing gut microbiomes across populations found that industrialized populations had significantly less microbial diversity than people in traditional agricultural communities, and that this gap has widened considerably in the last 50 years. We are eating from the same global inventory, processed under the same industrial conditions, fortified with the same synthetic vitamins to replace the nutrients that processing removes. And our inner ecology, the community of organisms that our immune systems, our nervous systems, our endocrine systems have co-evolved with over millennia, is becoming as monocultural as the fields that feed us. Consider what this means, not just biologically, but existentially. There's a concept in ecology called local adaptation, the process by which populations of organisms over generations of natural selection become specifically fitted to the conditions of their particular environment. It applies to plants, to animals, to bacteria, and, this is the part that tends to make people uncomfortable, to humans. The populations of a given region, eating the food grown in that region's soil, breathing that region's air, exposed to that region's pathogens over thousands of years, developed specific metabolic, immune, and microbial profiles calibrated to that specific place. This is not mysticism. It is evolution. And it suggests that the ancient intuition behind concepts like terroir, like the locavorism of traditional cultures, like the insistence of traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda on eating foods appropriate to one's region and season, these intuitions were tracking something real. The food of a place was not merely available food. It was, in a deep biological sense, appropriate food, fitting food, food that resonated with the bodies of the people who had always lived there. When we eat a tomato engineered for shelf life rather than flavor, grown in a warehouse under artificial light, fed with synthetic fertilizer in chemically sterile soil, shipped from a country thousands of miles away, we are not simply eating a less tasty tomato. We are consuming something that carries no information about our place, our soil, our local microbial community. We are receiving calories with no ecological signal, sustenance without resonance. We have become, in the most precise sense of the word, occupants of landscapes that no longer feed us in the way they once did, that no longer know us, because we have severed the connection through which that knowing was transmitted. The question that haunts all of these stories, the question about sound, about time, about light, is not whether the standardization was worth it on purely practical terms. Perhaps it was. The Green Revolution saved hundreds of millions of lives. Industrial agriculture feeds 8 billion people. These are not nothing. The question is what we did not know we were losing, because we did not have the framework to understand what we had. When the farmers of a medieval valley selected the best wheat plants from their harvest and saved their seeds for next year, they were not making an aesthetic choice or a sentimental one. They were participating in a continuous biological conversation between human culture and the living landscape, a conversation conducted through taste, through failure, through observation, through the knowledge held in hands and passed to children. They were the medium through which the land expressed its finest possibilities in edible form. That conversation has been interrupted. In most of the world, it has been ended entirely, replaced by a monologue from industrial laboratories producing seeds whose intellectual property belongs to multinational corporations and whose genetics are optimized for one thing: yield, measured in tons per hectare, regardless of place. What do we lose when a unique organism disappears? We lose all the futures it might have had, all the descendants it might have produced, all the adaptations it might have made as the climate changed, as new diseases emerged, as human needs evolved. A variety that goes extinct takes with it a unique solution to a problem that may not yet have been posed. And we lose something harder to quantify. We lose the taste of a specific place, shaped by specific human hands, carrying the biological record of a specific relationship between people and soil that existed nowhere else on Earth and will never exist again. The bells are gone. The frequencies are standardized. The clocks run on someone else's sun, and the bread tastes like everywhere and nowhere, because it was grown in no particular place for no particular person, tuned to nothing at all.